Welcome into Gibson Fantasy Football Podcast. Woohoo! Happy Friday. TGIF, we've made it to the weekend. Hope everybody's had a fantastic week since I talked to you last on Sunday. Josh joining you here again from GFF, Gibson Fantasy Football. Back again. And we are back today for the Risers Fallers series part 2. All right, so last time we met here on Sunday, we were talking about quarterbacks, and so we've got some info to cover on that. If you're interested in hearing that episode, jump back onto our channel there on YouTube. It's Gibson Fantasy Football. Find it on Twitter, Gibson_FF, or the website GibsonFantasyFootball.com. So find any of that there, as well as all the other content we have. But even though we covered quarterbacks, the way the NFL goes these days, when you go 5 days, stuff changes. And so we have more quarterback info to update before we jump into the tight ends today. So let's start there. First and foremost, Mr. Matt Ryan on the move to the Colts. I think this is a little bit of a bump up for him. Better offensive line, better weapons, better coaching staff, better offense overall. So I think he bumps back into that, mid tight end or QB2 kind of area there. Certainly not somebody you're going to want to stream too much in a one quarterback league, but in 2 quarterback superflex, I think he's not a bad option. Probably want him as your QB3 if you can, but if you had to have him as your QB2, he'd be all right. He's not going to kill you. And then after he vacated that spot in Atlanta, they went and signed Marcus Mariota, who, much like Trubisky, goes from a backup job to a starting job. So now he enters the conversation of QB2 as well. And does have some rushing upside. Looked okay in the backup role at the Raiders last year when he stepped in for Carr there. So I think he could be, usable anyway. So curious to see kind of how that goes. They'll probably draft somebody, but maybe not. Maybe they don't. One that I had anticipated happening, so for me, this is a bit of a neutral move, is Jameis Winston goes back to the Saints. I know they were thinking about Deshaun Watson, and that didn't pan out. But outside of that, I always thought Winston was going to end up back with the Saints, and honestly, I think that's a really good fit for both parties. He already knows the system. He was looking pretty good last year. Certainly streaky still, and had a game or two where he looked like old Jameis, throwing interceptions and looking a little careless. But overall, I think he has room to grow in the system, and puts him as a QB2 as well for fantasy. Probably a little more unreliable, but we'll see. The other 2 individuals that we get to talk about are interconnected by one superstar wide receiver. And no, it's not Davante Adams. We already covered that with Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr. But it is the same division as Derek Carr, and that would be Tyreek Hill from the Chiefs. So we got Mr. Tyreek Hill on the move from the Chiefs all the way over to the Dolphins. So that puts Mahomes as a riser, or as a faller, and Tua as a riser. So, for Mahomes, he's still Patrick Mahomes. He's still going to be, I actually put a poll up on Twitter to see where people had him, top 3, top 5, top 10, top 12. And majority of people were leaning top 5 with the second top 10. So still a high-end quarterback, but I think, not having Tyreek Hill, much like not having Davante Adams for Rodgers, it hurts. I know they brought in MVS. They got Juju. They'll draft somebody, I suspect. But still, Mahomes takes a little bit of a hit here. On the flip side, Tua goes up. Certainly the most talented receiver he'll have ever played with. And I think he started out, had a bit of a tough year last year, but there was a lot going on. The Deshaun Watson trade rumors, the coaching staff disagreements with management. Brian Flores ended up getting fired. So, that was probably some tension there. He had some injuries. So lots of stuff going on. Feels to me like if we're going to give Lawrence a pass, we give Tua a pass, and we clean the slate and put him to the test this year because he's got Waddle, he's got Hill, he's got Gesicki, Edmonds in the backfield. So lots of opportunity there. And so for Tua, I think he goes into a high-end QB2 and could crack QB1 numbers depending on how that all pans out. So we'll see what that brings. But that's enough about quarterbacks because this is the tight ends episode. And while it's a tricky position because we're always on the hunt for them, it's something that any information we can get going could be beneficial. So let me wet the whistle and then we'll get into the first one. Mr. Dalton Schultz of the Dallas Cowboys. Wrote about him in my article. So we saw Amari Cooper go to the Browns. We saw Cedric Wilson sign with the Dolphins. And then we see Schultz get tagged and come back. So looks good there. I see him as probably like a mid tight end one. I think he, after that top 6-7 guys, he's kind of right around there. So I think he's a solid option and somebody that would be worth having. And right behind him, or even kind of around that area, in redraft, in Dynasty, I would definitely have this player ahead of him, would be Pat Freiermuth. If you're a Ballers fan, you know that the Muth is Luth. And we'll have some fun with him this year because Juju's gone, Ebron's gone, target share is on the rise. We'll see if they bring anybody in behind Deontay and Claypool. I'm not sure it'll be anybody significant. So I think he's going to be all right. I'm excited to see what happens with Freiermuth. Next one up would be Njoku. So we saw the Browns say farewell to Austin Hooper, who finds himself with another team, and then bring back Njoku on the tag. And so he becomes the guy there, which wouldn't have meant a ton under Baker. But certainly with Watson there now, it is significant. And that's a pretty big increase for him. Hard to project. We got Watson's off-field stuff. We got a suspension probably coming. It's a bit murky there. So at this point, I think he's probably a low-end tight end one. But he could have higher potential, especially right now with just Amari Cooper kind of leading the way in that offense. So we'll see what they do there, but certainly somebody to have an interest in. And then my man, right behind me here, Albert O, gets the huge upgrade of Russell Wilson coming to the team. And combined with that, if it wasn't good enough to get a Hall of Fame quarterback, how about the person ahead of you in the pecking order, Noah Fant, being shipped out of town at the same time? So he's a huge riser. He was probably, like a tight end 3, somebody you didn't really want on your team for all purposes, except for Dynasty as a stash. And now enters that high-end tight end 2 conversation, maybe even, in that like 10 to 15 range, which we'll see some other folks kind of joining that range now as well. But somebody of interest, even in redraft, as well as certainly Dynasty with his young age. So excited for him personally and sort of analytically. And then another individual there, Mr. Mo Alie-Cox. So he takes over that lead role coming back with the Colts as Jack Doyle was no longer with the team. And so Mo Alie-Cox takes on that role. And along with Pittman, really isn't a whole lot else in that offense. So we'll see what they do. Even Zach Pascal, I think, moved on actually. So not a lot for competition. Matt Ryan's a decent quarterback, so I expect him to do okay there. And I see him in that kind of 10 to 15 range as well. Gerald Everett, so, goes from Seattle to the Chargers, which is an upgrade because you're going to Herbert. And, he had Russell Wilson, but he was competing with some pretty solid stuff there. And then we saw Jared Cook shipped out of town. So that opens up the option as the lead tight end role there. So I think he moves into an interesting streaming option there. Probably not quite as high as those guys. I'd have him more in that 15 to 20 range. But somebody to be interested by for sure. Also throw in Zach Ertz. So he re-signed with the Cardinals, which is really a neutral sort of transaction. But we saw AJ Green and Christian Kirk both gone. So that opens the door for some more target share behind Hopkins and Rondell Moore, who weird jury's still out on kind of what he can do, right? Lots of potential and upside, but we certainly didn't see it last year. So I think he's well secured in that offense there, Ertz. In addition to that, you've got Gesicki. No, sorry, not Gesicki. He's in the other the category there. Cameron Brate. So Cameron Brate is got the option as of right now. We'll see if Gronk comes back or not. If Gronk comes back, then certainly Brate's going to fall pretty far down to be almost not worth keeping or drafting anyway. But we'll see. I'm not so sure Gronk's coming back. I don't know. He didn't look so happy at the end of last year. He looked unhealthy. So we'll see where things go with that. And then we've got Irv Smith, who kind of was the guy last year for Minnesota, but didn't pan out because of injury. And then Conklin, who was behind him, started to actually shine. So there's a little bit of concern there coming into this year. And that's gone now because Conklin's gone to the Jets. So that works out for Irv Smith. Lots of potential there. So I am curious to kind of see where that takes him and what that does. Another one would be Kelsey. So watches Hill leave. And, there could be some sort of counterpoints around, well, he'll be the focus of defenses now, which I think is fair. But at the same time, targets go up and he's just so good at getting open, particularly in the red zone. So I think as that red zone threat and they're bringing in Juju and MVS and probably somebody else, it'll be enough that will keep defenses from always completely focusing on him. So I think he'll continue to rise and at least stay the same, if not increase his opportunities in the red zone. Now let's take a look at flipping over here. So fallers, Mr. Dan Arnold was looking pretty good last year for the Jags, and then they went and picked up Engram. Don't love either of them now, so I think they're both toasty toast. Parham, had a lot of hope for him with figuring Jared Cook would leave. They bring in Everett. Now it's like, not great. Again, I don't see Everett as a huge, fantasy asset. Like I said, 15 to 20 range. But Parham goes even further down because he is currently at least projected to be the number 2 in that offense. Dawson Knox. So they bring in OJ Howard right behind him for the Bills. They did lose Sanders and Beasley, so that could maybe help. But they brought in Crowder. They've got Isaiah McKenzie, Gabe Davis. We'll see how that all kind of shakes out. The concern would be that OJ Howard maybe steals a couple of touchdowns, and that was really his calling card last year for Dawson Knox. He did not have a lot of volume, so unless he can snag some volume from some of those other receivers that left and sort of emerge ahead of guys like Isaiah McKenzie, Crowder, and Gabe Davis, then he could be in for some real tough times this year and a far worse season if his touchdown totals drop. DeGuara for the Packers, Tunyon resigns. That really puts a damper on things there. That's actually good news for Tunyon because Devontae Adams left, so he could be a riser as well, you could say. But certainly DeGuara a faller with Tunyon coming in and taking that role back. Gesicki, so he goes down as Tyreek Hill comes. He was clearly behind Waddle as the 2, and now they both drop down one on the pecking order there. So tough times for Gesicki in that sense, but he doesn't go that far. So then it'll be a good offense, and he's clearly the 3rd target. So I think he's still in that tight end 10 to 15 range, maybe even just ahead of that, but certainly a low end tight end 1 at this point. A few omissions. So Noah Fant, I didn't talk about him because it's really kind of neutral. He was with Drew Lock. Now he's probably with Drew Lock, maybe Geno Smith, maybe a rookie. It's not looking great. He's got DK and Lockett to contend with. He had Judy, Sutton, and Patrick. So I mean, it's pretty neutral in that sense. Hooper to the Titans. I mean, we'll see. I don't have a lot of faith in him doing very well. He does sort of emerge as the number 2 behind AJ Brown right now, but I'm not sure that's the way that looks when the season starts. Ricky Seals Jones goes to the Giants. Okay. I mean, I think he was better off in Washington, really, because now there's more targets and probably a worse quarterback, or at least not much of a better quarterback. You could probably say Heineke was worse than Jones, but Wentz is kind of in the same category there, so I'm not sure that's much better. And then Pitts, I think it's neutral for him as well. I mean, the loss in talent in Matt Ryan, balanced by the loss in Ridley for targets. So I think he's right where, number 1 target guaranteed, tons of targets going to be coming his way. And you have to believe, regardless of who's throwing him the ball, he gets more than 1 touchdown this year. So I would expect him to be on the rise in that sense. So I think it all washes out pretty much the same as where we expected at the beginning of the year. And then a few players that are still out there, Gronk, Jarwin, and Ebron. Really, it's Gronk, right? Like those 2 other guys, you're not be that interested for fantasy. Maybe stashes, if anything. But Gronk certainly could be, a mid to low end tight end 1 if he comes back healthy, especially with Godwin missing some time early. Although Russell Gage will be there to potentially take on some of that role. So we'll see. But certainly Gronk will be the big one to watch there. All right, so that's tight ends. We hammered out quarterbacks. We hammered out tight ends. Next up will be wide receivers and then running backs. We'll be back within the next week to hammer out wide receivers. So stay tuned for that. And if you have any questions for us or anything you want to reach out and interact in any way, GibsonFantasyFootball.com, Gibson_FF on Twitter, Gibson Fantasy Football on here on the YouTube channel, and Gibson Fantasy Football on Instagram. So find us, interact. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed us today, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave any comments in the video. Otherwise, we will be back in the next week to do wide receivers. And until next time, clear eyes, full heart.